Hi everyone, my name is Theresa Stinnett and I'm the author and illustrator of my new children's book, Huckleberry Pie. This is a story about having a sharing heart and the importance of kindness. Today I'm going to be doing a read aloud, so I hope you enjoy it. Huckleberry Pie, The Adventures of Archie Hedgehog. Archie was a little hedgehog who lived in a cozy pine tree. He was a very kind person, and whenever he could, he liked to help his neighbors. One morning, Archie was very happy. It was a hot summer day, and the huckleberries were just right for picking. If I pick all day, he thought to himself, I'll have enough berries to make a pie. He loved pies, and huckleberries were a special treat. So he slung a big bag over his shoulder and set out through the forest. Archie walked and walked, looking for a special berry bush just for him. But the woods were full of animals that day. At every bush, squirrels and chipmunks were busy filling their baskets. He had come a little bit late, and most of the berries were already gone. Oh dear, he thought to himself. Will there be any berries left for me? He looked all over the berry patch, but the berries were quickly disappearing. Hello there, Mrs. Wattleseed. Would you mind if I picked with you? He asked, waving to a big red squirrel. Sorry, Archie, Mrs. Wattleseed answered, but I've already picked the bush clean. Not far away, there was a little chipmunk who was also picking berries. His bush still looked full. How about you, Chestnut? Would you let me pick with you? Archie asked. Chestnut was a greedy little fellow. He hadn't brought a bag or a basket, because he just ate his berries off the bush. Now the tiny chipmunk glared over at Archie. No, you can't, he snapped with his cheeks stuffed full. These are my berries, all mine. He crammed several more huckleberries into his mouth and munched away. Archie started to feel sad. He was hungry for that delicious pie, but there just weren't enough berries to go around. A lot of animals were greedy like Chestnut. They just didn't want to share. One of the worst was a grumpy badger named Grunt. Out of my way, he growled, shoving animals out of his path. Get away from my berries. I saw them first. They're mine, I tell you. Get away. He even grabbed some of the other creatures' berries and stuffed them into his own basket. He was a very mean badger. Soon, Archie had searched the whole berry patch. Feeling sad and disappointed, he sighed and sat down on a stone. What's the matter, little fellow? A raven asked. Having a hard day? I came to pick huckleberries, Mr. Inkcap, Archie answered. But there isn't any left for me. Inkcap laughed and smiled. Are you joking? He chuckled. We live in a big forest. There are plenty of berries. Archie sighed again. Well, I can't find any, he pouted. Then come along and I'll show you where they are, the raven said. He flew up into the air and started to lead the way. Archie ran after him. It was hard for him to keep up with the raven, but Mr. Inkcap was very kind. He always stopped and waited for Archie to catch up. Then he would go on, cawing to let the hedgehog know where he was. In a few moments, they came to the edge of a wide, rushing stream. Inkcap flew across and circled around a pretty place on the other side. This is where they are, he called. Then he flew away. Archie couldn't believe his eyes. Across the stream, there was a lovely berry patch, and no one else was using it. But how would he cross the creek? The water was cold, and he couldn't swim. Still, he was determined to get across somehow. Happily, Archie hurried to the bank and looked all around. Few of the animals in that part of the woods went to the other side of the creek. The only bridge in sight was a small log which had fallen over the water. He climbed onto it. His little feet slipped with each step, and he had to be very careful. He walked across as slow as a slug until, at last, he hopped onto the other side of the bank. Archie took a deep breath and smiled as he looked at the huckleberries. There were thousands of them. With a chuckle, he began to pick, placing each berry carefully into his bag. He didn't want to squish any of them. That would have been an awful purple mess. He hadn't picked many berries before he heard a strange noise in the woods. It was a big, booming noise, with a scuffling, scratching sound now and then. Archie stood perfectly still, shaking with fear. What was this huge creature? As the footsteps came closer, he could also hear a deep, humming voice. It was a bear. Bertram was a cheerful bear, as long as he was alone, but he never had liked company, and he couldn't stand trespassers. As Archie saw Bertram coming, he began to panic. What was he going to do? Perhaps Mr. Bear won't see me, he thought silently. Maybe he'll just mind his own business. Quietly, he grabbed a berry and gently set it down in his bag. Bertram was rummaging around in the berry patch, clawing at anthills and sucking the berries off of nearby bushes. Archie reached for another berry and plucked it from the branch. Suddenly, the bear stopped with a snort. He lifted his burly head. "Who's there?" Bertram asked gruffly, sniffing the air. Archie's heart pounded hard with fear. As quietly as possible, he started to tiptoe away. The bear put his nose to the ground, smelling for the trespasser. Archie was close to the stream. If I can just make it to the slippery log, he thought to himself, I'm sure I can get away. He walked a little faster. He was almost there, but just before he reached the water's edge, his foot stepped on a crunchy old pine cone. Bertram's ears perked. "Someone's in my berry patch," he yelled. With an angry growl, he lunged toward the stream. Archie jumped out of the way just in time. Bertram was stomping the ground, trying to find him. Archie couldn't worry about being quiet now. He rushed away through the rustling grass and crunchy pine needles. He could hear Bertram running after him, snorting and roaring as he went. How could a little hedgehog outrun a huge bear? Archie ran under bushes and logs trying to lose the bear, but everywhere he went, Bertram was close behind him. "I'll teach you not to pick berries in my patch," the bear shouted breathlessly. Right then, Archie hurried into some tall grass, looking for a place to hide. He tried to scramble under a rock, but he was too big to fit. He looked around for an empty gopher's hole, but he just couldn't find one. At last, he saw an old hollow stump in a thicket of rose bushes. He ran toward it as fast as he could and scrambled into a little hole. But halfway in, he found that he was just too large to squeeze through. He couldn't go forward, and he couldn't go back. He was stuck. "Oh no," he thought wildly. "What do I do?" He could hear Bertram getting closer and closer, searching through the tall grass. Archie was too worried about getting away to see that the stump was someone's home. But suddenly, as he squeezed and squeezed himself through the hole, he felt someone grab his hand and give him a pull. With a startled shriek, he stumbled into the dark, damp stump. "Is that nasty old bear after you?" a caring voice asked. Archie nodded his head. He could still hear Bertram sniffing around outside. "Well, don't worry about it. You're safe here," the voice said kindly. Archie sighed in relief. Bertram didn't come much closer. Soon the bear gave up searching and strolled back to his berry patch. As Archie's eyes got used to the darkness, he saw that he was standing in a cozy home with a kind-looking mouse. "I'm Mrs. Dindle," the mouse said. "And who might you be?" Archie was glad to tell her all about himself and what had happened to him. They both sat down on mushrooms and began to chat. Mrs. Dindal was a very old mouse who walked with a tiny cane. As Archie talked and talked, the mouse offered him a dandelion root. He took it and smiled thankfully, but when he took a bite, he nearly spit it out. It was terribly bitter. No, thank you," he squeaked, pushing the root away. "But you must be hungry," Mrs. Dindal said. "It's almost time for lunch." "Oh, I won't be hungry for long," Archie giggled, remembering the pie he was going to make. "I'm going to pick some more huckleberries and bake a pie today." The old mouse smiled. "How lovely," she said sweetly. "I miss the days when I used to pick berries in the summertime. But I'm too old to walk to the berry patch now. These dandelions do me just fine." She picked up a piece of the bitter roots and started to nibble. "Well, I think I had better be going," Archie said after a while. "Thanks ever so much for helping me. Oh, would you mind giving me a push outside?" He walked carefully to the door and looked all around to make sure the bear was gone. Then he wiggled and squeezed, and Mrs. Dindal pushed him from behind until he popped out of the doorway. "Thanks again," he said, trotting off. He was very careful now. He always looked over his shoulder and all around to make sure Bertram wasn't sneaking up on him. But the big bear had gone back to his own berry patch and was enjoying himself all alone. A little way down the dusty path, Archie found a new patch of berries. They were as big as blueberries, and they were all his. With a happy heart, he picked them until his bag was heavy and full. "Oh, how wonderful," he thought to himself. "Now I have enough to make a really big pie." When he was all done, he hurried back to the stream and found a new, less slippery log to cross. He was so happy. As soon as he got home, he put the berries into a pie crust with lots of honey. Then he baked the pie till it was golden brown. It made his house smell so good. "Ah," he sighed at last, taking the pie out of his oven. "Finally, my pie is done." Quickly, he pulled out a sharp rose thorn and cut a big slice of pie. The very first bite made him glad that he had gone through all that trouble. There was nothing quite like huckleberry pie. But as he slurped up the sweet purple syrup, he remembered old Mrs. Dindal sitting at home, eating those awful bitter dandelions. Poor Mrs. Dindal. Who knew how long it had been since she had tasted a berry pie? Suddenly, Archie had an idea. He smiled as he picked up the pie and walked out of the door. He crossed the creek once again and made his way to the old stump. "Oh, Mrs. Dindal," he called, knocking on her front door. The sweet smell of the berry pie filled the mouse's home. "Who could that be?" she asked, coming to the door. She smiled happily. "Why, it's you again. Can I help you?" She glanced down at the pie with a hungry look, but she was too polite to ask about it. "I came to share my pie with you. It's fresh out of the oven," Archie said. The old mouse was delighted. She helped him through the tiny doorway. Then they both sat down at her mushroom table and feasted on berry pie. Mrs. Dindal had so much to talk about. She told many stories about her life, and Archie gladly listened. He was so happy that he had made a new friend. The end. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this story. This is a book that's very special to my heart because I actually envisioned the character of Archie Hedgehog when I was just 8 years old. I've been sketching him all throughout the years, and it's always been my dream to turn him into a children's book series. So I'm really excited that I've got book number 1 out, and I hope you'll subscribe to my channel because I'm going to be sharing my process as I begin illustrating the next book in line. So I'll see you on the next video.